Hello, my name is Chitta. I am one of Bante's students, and we decided to try and help Bante because he doesn't live at a fixed monastery. Wherever he goes becomes a monastery, and therefore he doesn't have a fixed donation box where people can make offerings. So we've added a link below that you can make a donation to help protect the sasana and help support this wonderful monk if you feel that way inclined. Thank you. Be well.
For this week, we go again to the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses for our sutta of the week. In our, I believe this is the 92nd week of the Sutta Exploration Series, which we began about, I think, 3 years ago, maybe more. I'm not sure, but it is a crucial sutta to understand on a day-to-day basis, in our own lives, how we come to interpret paticca samuppada, dependent arising or dependent origination. How is it really pertinent, relevant to the moments that you're living through, one moment to the next? Life requires interpretation. The way we translate things to make them intelligible, to make them meaningful, has often a lot to do with the linguistic understanding. We use language, we use images, we use relationships, sometimes even textures, emotional textures or flavors. And that means the associations that that particular word, concept has to do with imagery, and specifically things that we might have gone through ourselves in the form of memories. And the associations of similar thought patterns. And this is where worldviews come in, our old narratives come in. And then we end up saying something as a response, as a reaction to whatever it was that was taking place, what we were triggered by. To be compelled, impelled at doing, saying, even thinking. In this Dhamma and discipline of Lord Buddha's, we place a special emphasis on thoughts. And by using the word thought, what that entails, what that brings with it, are our interpretations as to how things are supposed to be. So when we look at each other or ourselves, what we're looking at are basically individual bundles of interpretations. Usually it means assumptions, things that are taken as givens, plural of given, things that we have come to accept as truths. And what most of us will do is we'll go around life looking for things, movements, ways of thought, individuals, relationships, friendships, associations that are somewhat close to our own inner linguistics, if you will, our inner interpretations of things. What comes, quote unquote, natural to us? Basically, we want to maintain the status quo. We don't like to shock ourselves with change, with what life is, which is change. But what we're trying to do in the meantime is we're trying to impose our own measures and worldviews and narratives and interpretations, conclusions basically, which are completely based on passing assumptions that we somehow wanted to localize, crystallize, hold in place, and somewhat for us to end up containing reality. It's like someone who tries to pinch the ocean or the sea with your index and your thumb and say, aha, I've grabbed hold of the ocean. I have in my hands a sampling of the ocean. This will not change. This bundle is not going to change. Of course, we realize, thanks to that metaphor, that that would be a futile effort because it has nothing to do with sanity, let alone reality. Because we can't control that. We can't pinch ourselves out a portion of the ocean and call it the ocean. But fortunately, if we are living through, going through life, we will be presented with a series of situations, occasions, circumstances, events that will shake us down to our roots as far as those principles or truths with a small t that we've come to consider validations of the reality that we hope to be, which, by the way, changes constantly. Constantly. Why? Because the three characteristics of existence lie in front of us, staring at us. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. Anicca is impermanence, dukkha is suffering, anatta is the non-substantiality of an entity that has pinched itself out and away and from the rest of whatever that is happening, which is the continuum of life, based on circumstances, based on conditions, based on causality, based on the intentionality that result from the being that finds itself constantly changing within this vortex of life that we call one's own reality. So without trying to be philosophical or abstract about these very real principles that each of us goes through, here we have a sutta that is an invitation back to looking carefully at the dependent arising, dependent origination principle, which is key to the Dhamma. In fact, one cannot claim to be practicing the Dhamma unless they also see and look for, first of all, these relationships of paticca samuppada in one's own life, in your own thinking. You don't have to be interacting with others in order for you to see demonstrations of this happening live as to what is the cause for this to happen, what causes that to happen, that has brought this, which, by the way, if you have this as a result of what passed before, it also is the thing that will bring about that, meaning the next link. That's the relationship that I'm drawing on between this and that. So life has become this interplay, this exchange, or being spun around on this pendulum of going from one thing to the next, and then claiming to be someone, something that is unchanging, atta, a self, unchanging selfhood, a personality, me, myself, this is who I am, which basically means the creation of object and subject. So I wanted to share some thoughts there for you to reacquaint yourself with the principles of causation and paticca-samuppada, which basically they're synonymous. When you have this, that will come to be. When you have that, the other will come to be. So oftentimes people will say, well, what started it all? I was mentioning to a student not too long ago how if you have a circle, you cannot designate its beginning point and end point. If you can, then they're both together there. But you cannot unless you put a marker somewhere. You put a dot or a scratch on the circle, all of a sudden, guess what? We know where we created a reference point. We created a vortex. We created something that we attach ourselves to. And this is what is at the basis of atta, this idea of an atman, or a self, or a being that is unchanging, to whom all these things are happening. Now, this has been a very difficult principle to understand, not just for us here in living 26 centuries after Lord Buddha died, but even at the time of Lord Buddha himself, when he was teaching for the first time, or during those 45 years. So here we have an encounter with a bhikkhu, one of Lord Buddha's disciples, who comes forward and reveals to us all that he is stuck in that loop, which is everyone else's loop, and everyone who has ever existed who had been or has been a putujjana, an uneducated, unlearned, common, ordinary being who believes that there is a self, that there is self, is as in substantial personhood. That's what I mean. Because sometimes people used to argue, and still do, well, why does Lord Buddha use the term I in reference to himself if he doesn't believe in a self? Lord Buddha never said there is no self in that sense. He would use it in the conventional sense. He lived in the real world in that sense. So he would use these tools, but he never, and none of the Arahants believed or took it as a real thing, that there is this unchanging substantial being within that goes from life to life. But you had a lot of students of Lord Buddha's who still came from that Brahmanic view, that there is this Atman or Atta, this being inside, who's experiencing life. So this is a very important sutta because it is addressing all these different things in a very natural, contextually very rich also. It's not a very, very long sutta, but Nevertheless, it is full. It's full. It's so textured. And you see the relationship between a teacher and a student who doesn't necessarily seem to be that bright, as we're going to see. At least in the beginning, hopefully it changed later on. But so this is from the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses from the group of collection of discourses called the Nidana Vagga, which Nidana means causation, and the subcategory of it bears the same title, Nidana Samyutta, which is the connected discourses on causation, and from the section that is called nourishment or ahara. This is a very important principle in the Dhamma, ahara, nourishments. And we have that as a key principle in the Dhamma. By the way, ahara are the nourishments. Obviously, we have the physical body, physical sustenance, things that are consumable. Then there is contact. That's also a nourishment. Every time you reach over for your phone to check, what is that? You're looking for the sustenance, the nourishment of contact being made. When you look, when you hear a voice, a sound, what do? You turn your face, your head, your body to look at there, to see. Why? To feed yourself with that information. Ahara, Lord Buddha calls it. Contact, we're looking for contact. When someone's calling you or you're doing a Zoom session and they're talking, but you can't hear their voice, what's happening? Or you hear their voice and you can't see their image. Your brain says, well, I'm not getting the full sustenance, the full nourishment. Let me see the picture. Let me hear the sound. Those are also examples. That's why when you go on a retreat or when you seclude yourself from society, one of the things, there's this revolt within you, revolution within you that seeks out contact that you're not having. So there's that. Just like it's almost like a fast. Fasting from food, fasting from contact. That's why when we meditate, what we're doing, we are fasting during that 1 hour, 2 hours from contact, not necessarily nourishment only. Then there's intentional thinking, mano sanchetana. That's also contact, because your mind is going somewhere. You want to think. Ask any philosophy student, ask any debater, ask any politician, ask any journalist, ask anyone with a monkey mind. You want to go, you want to entertain yourself when you're by yourself, with memories, with thoughts, with situations, with conversations that have happened a long time ago, maybe. Or you want to think. That's also, Lord Buddha calls it ahara. And then there's the consciousness. The consciousnesses, Lord Buddha mentioned, are 6. Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. So in a nutshell, those are, so you see within this, not in this sutta, of course, but the section from which we get this sutta, which, by the way, is the sutta for today, is called Moḷiyaphagguna Sutta. Moḷiyaphagguna, that's the name of the Bhikkhu. It's in English, I translated it as Discourse of the Venerable Moḷiyaphagguna. And the sutta number is SN, because Samyutta Nikaya, SN 12.12, 12.12. Moḷiyaphagguna also is, the name itself says to us as to who he was, because many of these names are descriptors. The name of Venerable Sariputta, for example, was Upatissa. But when he ordained, he was given the name Sariputta because his mother's name was Sari. Putta means son, the son of Sari, Sariputta. And Kolita, the other chief disciple, who later on, after his ordination, came to be known as Mahamoggallana, his name was Kolita, but his last name was Moggallana. He came from the Moggallana family. But it so happened that Lord Buddha had many, many students with that name, Moggallana. So Lord Buddha designated him, the Sangha designated him as Maha, the great Moggallana, because he's the chief disciple and was second only to Lord Buddha in his psychic abilities. He was superlative in that, the best among the others, except for Lord Buddha, of course. But here we have Moḷiyaphagguna. Moḷiyaphagguna means like the one that had, you probably have seen in pictures, or like if you've seen people with dreadlocks, with hair, long hair, they used to, or they still do, turn them into a bundle over the head. Very, very long sometimes. Hair, for years they don't cut. So he happened to be one of those sadhus or ascetics that gave up that path and became a bhikkhu. Now it seems to be, as we're going to find out, that he didn't necessarily relinquish the deeper dreadlocks that he had around his heart, because he still has, we're going to see in a minute, quite a bit of a delusion and wrong view in understanding what Lord Buddha is teaching in the Dhamma. So we'll see that in a second. So SN 12.12, Moḷiyaphagguna Sutta, a very important sutta, by the way. Let's begin. Once, while the Blessed One was staying in Savatthi, he addressed the bhikkhus by saying, Bhikkhus, there are these four kinds of nourishment which are responsible for the sustenance of beings that are already reborn and for those that are about to be reborn. What are these four? So as I mentioned, those four are going to come up now. The nourishment of ingestible food that one consumes, whether it is of a rough or refined quality. Secondly, there is contact. Then there is intentional thinking as the third nourishment, that is mental volition or intentional thinking. And fourthly, there is consciousness. Now, bhikkhus, these are the four kinds of nourishment which are responsible for the sustenance of beings that are already reborn and for those that are about to be reborn. In Buddhism, in the Dhamma, we usually consider a person to be born from the moment of conception, when the vijnana and nama rupa come together in the form of an embryo. There's life. So we count with the 9 months included in the mother's womb. So when we understand, so the person now has taken birth in the womb of the mother. So from then already the embryo is feeding on, obviously, the nourishment that's coming in through the blood, what will turn into the umbilical cord. But because the embryo is now attached to the uterine wall, the embryo is getting sustenance from that, because that's where the bond is happening. The linkage is already taking place, the information. But first ahara is the nourishment of the body, or the something that you can consume. Later on, we can see it's a rice, it's warm tea, it's the banana, it's the air. All these help with the rupa section, but specifically in this case, the nourishment are those things that Lord Buddha calls the rough or the refined. So it could be something very basic, or it could be really refined, of a refined nature, let's say, a delicious something, that you get. Or it could be even water, glass of water. That's also giving nourishment. You can go on a fast for weeks and not die. But if you go on without water for an extended period of time, you will die. So that's also nourishment. The second one, as I was mentioning, is the contact. That's why it's very important, looking at it from a different angle, as to what the mother to be, is being exposed to. That's the second nourishment. I wish more people would take this into consideration when they are getting pregnant, or they know someone who's pregnant. because oftentimes people talk about alcohol and cigarettes, and that's it, or drugs, and that's it. Well, in that sense, those will fall under the category of the first ahara, the first nourishment, which in this case is toxic nourishment. And that's why the child comes out of the womb and they're already addicted. I've met in my career as a junior high, elementary, and high school teacher, and later on as a therapist, I've seen this in children that already are displaying those characteristics that their parent had. The child has this proclivity, this desire for cocaine, and the child never touched cocaine. Mother did. So if we look at that in the context of the ahara, whether it's emotional, psychological disturbances, all these things, in the formula of the ahara, so many things become easier. And this is why I think it would be wonderful to bring in these principles into the curriculum of education in the world. But we're actually going the opposite direction. We're becoming stupider and stupider, lacking science, lacking actual valid science in our curriculum, social studies, world history, all these things. So human value and virtue and morality and ethics are going up in smoke. So, but this is why we need to educate ourselves and help the world around us by teaching people about these nourishments. But I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'll address those two as well. As I mentioned about the intentional thinking, the drive to think. So many people get turned on, get really attracted by, or are attracted to thinking. It gives them a certain sense of appeasement, certain satisfaction. That's why they go to a meditation sitting or a retreat even. And their mind is using even the principles that they've learned, let's say, from the Dhamma talk. They use that as an opportunity to engage the intellectual thinking part of their brain, mano sanchetana. They use that as their tennis court of activity in their mind. Meanwhile, it's simply there, the principle is there to help you do the opposite, calm things down. Because we have an addiction to activity at this level. And then the emotional part comes in, or the consciousness part comes in the form of the six senses. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, so these are the four nourishments. Sometimes in English are translated as nutriment. I don't like to use that term. Nourishment to me says gives a much better picture. But the best is obviously the Pali word, ahara. So when Lord Buddha says this, so when this was stated, the Venerable Moḷiyaphagguna addressed the Blessed One by asking, "But Bhante, who is it that consumes the nourishment of consciousness?" This already screams that the person, the one who's questioning, believes that there must be somebody who is on the receiving end of this nourishment of consciousness. So he picked out the consciousness part, the vijnana, and in his mind he concluded that yes, if there's a consciousness, then there's got to be somebody who is consuming that consciousness. So who is it? So it's a given already. It's an established truth in the mind of such a person. And Lord Buddha's response is here. "That's not a proper question to be asked," replied the Blessed One as he added, "I do not teach you by saying there is someone who consumes. But if I had been instructing you by saying there is someone who consumes, then your question would have been valid, where you would be appropriately inquiring by asking the question, Bhante, who is it that consumes the nourishment of consciousness? So, seeing that I do not declare nor ever taught you in this manner, your question is wrongly formulated. Basically, he's bringing his Brahmanic, Vedic principles, his way of thinking. So, we think that simply because a person has taken on Lord Buddha as their refuge, the Dhamma as their refuge, as the Sangha as their refuge, and put on the robes and shave their heads and going through the whole routine, that they've changed. No, it wasn't like that then, and it surely is not like that now, 26 centuries later. One has to be carefully listening to what is being said and definitely what is being lived, how a person's life is, holy life is being lived. Is it being lived? So this is where I've always told and instructed and encouraged lay people to really do their due diligence. Simply because it walks like a bhikkhu, talks like a bhikkhu, or, wears the robes, that's not all. That's not all. We need to listen. One of the bhikkhus I used to, Mahatheras, in fact, I used to listen to their Dhamma talks. When I was in KL, in Malaysia, I went and visited his monastery. It was practically abandoned when I went there, but there were some visitors, so it was lovely being there. But years later, I'm actually listening to a Dhamma talk recently, and I saw him in this recording talk about soul. Soul, that a person's soul gets to be reborn into the hell realm or into the heavenly realm. And I had to really do a double, like I had to take, go back and re-listen, like, did I hear him correctly? Because it's not right. But that is what he was referring to. So please always have your reference, not this bhikkhu, that bhante, that ajahn, whomever, that sayadaw. No, the Dhamma and Vinaya are our guide. Because anytime, you have to be careful because you're responsible for your life and you're responsible ultimately of your understanding of the Dhamma. That bhikkhu, this ajahn, this bhante, this sayadaw, we're each responsible for our own defilements. No one else is. And each of us are responsible for our own awakening as well. The nibbana that you'll experience is yours, thanks to your effort, ultimately. And your wisdom, that needs to be checked to make sure that it is wisdom, that it is, in essence, based on the Dhamma of Lord Buddha's. So please be careful what you expose your ears and eyes to, your mind to. Don't be influenced by the bells and whistles, basically. So he's asking, but Lord Buddha says here, so seeing that I do not declare nor ever taught you in this manner, your question is wrongly formulated. However, he says, if you were to ask me instead, Bhante, what is it that consciousness nourishes? If Lord Buddha says consciousness is a nourishment, okay, then, the legitimate question would be, okay, what does this nourishment nourish? What is it a nourishment for, basically? What is it that depends and relies on consciousness for its condition and sustenance? So Lord Buddha just said, okay, consciousness is a nourishment, and what is it that depends on consciousness as its nourishment? So he's saying the before and after, the linkage. He's giving us hints that he's talking about dependent arising, paticca samuppada. Such a valid question indeed would be an appropriate one, for it would then deserve its appropriate answer, which is consciousness is the nourishment that serves as the very condition which sustains future re-becomings. So because of consciousness, you will have future re-becoming in the form of namarupa, for example. Thus, it is the responsible agent bringing forth renewed existence. Renewed existence, consciousness. Now, some people have for a long time considered dependent origination to be divided into 3 lifetimes. So, if consciousness is going to be feeding, sustaining future rebecoming, so I don't have to worry about that because that's going to be in another lifetime. There are people who still believe that dependent origination is about one past life, the current life, and the future life. Absolutely wrong. Lord Buddha never said such a thing. It is misconstrued, misrepresented. That's, these are happening in the moment. These are happening in one's own, one particular lifetime, all of the aspects. So here, sustaining future re-becoming, every time we have a moment of tanha, craving, what it is a promise for a re-becoming in the next moment. In the next moment. That's why when you go and try an ice cream gelateria, for example, if you want to try different flavors, somebody says, would you like this flavor? Okay, you try this, and then that's your favorite flavor. But then somebody says, oh, have you ever tried that one over there? What is that? Consciousness of the eye, consciousness of the ear, because you just heard about that. Consciousness of the mind, which is now creating, imagining, manana, formulating new possibilities in the mind, all because of the nourishment of consciousness. Yeah, I might try that one. What is that? Oh, that's a mango flavor. Oh, but this was coconut. Okay, let me try the I've never tried the mango. Oh, but that one's over there. Is that's the peach with basil. Ooh, I'll try that. What are these? Re-becomings. You see how the consciousnesses led the mind to go over there searching for a new experience, a re-becoming? And it didn't happen in another lifetime. It's happening now. Paticca Samuppada is about you in this lifetime now. In fact, in each moment, you find all the 12 links. Nowhere else. You don't have to wait temporally for the other phases of Paticca Samuppada to unfold, because each link has within it dukkha, so long as we are living in avidya, meaning not seeing the link for what it is, which is it's a link. In order for a link to be a link, it needs to have 2 other links, right? One link pointing this way, one link pointing that way. It's a linkage. The before, the after, and there's one in between. So, and thus it is the responsible agent bringing forth renewed existence. So you see, the Lord Buddha never mentioned anything about who is it that is getting the nourishment of consciousness. He's pulling the arrow, trying to pull the arrow of ignorance out of the heart of Moḷiyaphagguna. So the correct way of understanding this would be Vijnana Paccaya Namarupa. Vijnana. Or using this formula over there, it's re-becoming is, or becoming sometimes, bhava. Bhava. So, but Paccaya, causes, conditions. So these are the conditionalities. Each one is a trigger. A very simple example would be oxygen, gasoline, or something that has a spark creates a spark, and you have gasoline, or something that's, inflammable. Suddenly there's a fire. Well, wait a minute, there was no fire. What happened? So an ignorance mind comes and says, the gasoline was there, the spark was there, and then there's the fire, and that is seen as a third thing. It's not. The meeting of the two, tinnang paccaya passo, tinnang, with the meeting. There's this, when you have all these three, then you have contact, Lord Buddha says, which creates feeling, which creates craving, which creates grabbing, which creates rebecoming. But this is happening so fast. And that's why it's important for us to practice looking at, pick any part of your day, pick any part of your behavior, pick any part of your emotional knots, or anything that your manasikara, your mindfulness, is able to, for some reason, lock on during your day, and just see whether there is wisdom being applied by you to see that thing for what it is. And what it is basically, if you recall from the Moļiyaphagguna Sutta from, I think it was last year, where I covered it, which is the middle. Moļiyaphagguna means the middle. It's a beautiful sutta, and I covered it with you last year, I think. And in it, Lord Buddha is being asked by these 5 or 6 Theras who come, because they have been dealing with this set of verses that Lord Buddha gave in the Tissammittaya Sutta of the Sutta Nipata. And they're asking Bhante, because it had to do with one end, two end, what's in the middle, and who is the seamstress? The seamstress, who is that? So each of these Theras, who are Arahants, by the way, had their own way of interpreting those 4 questions. But Lord Buddha's verse is saying one understands through wisdom whatever's in the middle, therefore does not get attached to the middle. Majje manta nalippati. Whatever is in the middle, that's the majje. Manta means wisdom. Nalippati means does not get attached or locked on or accept it as real. Moḷiyaphagguna here we see is getting locked on to the middle. He's saying, oh, okay. So if consciousness is nourishment, then who's getting the consciousness? Who is it, Bhante? Who is it? Where is that self? Who is it? Is it me? Is it Atman? And Lord Buddha is saying you're missing, because there's these 2 other links. Because he just pointed out the rebecoming. So we need to understand correctly both ends of whatever it is that you're looking at. So that would be another way of understanding, or simplifying, if you will, the paticca samuppada. Whatever's in front of you, whatever experience, whatever is highlighted by your sati, don't just look at that. Look at the other 2 ends between which this thing is highlighted, because it's all linked up. What is it that has conditioned or is conditioning this which is in front of me, which is in the spotlight? And what is this, the one in the spotlight, conditioning for the next thing? So this would be another way of seeing anicca. We're seeing the continuum. So there's nothing to be holding on as this real me, I, myself, you over there. There isn't. We understand that there is just a process. So there's nothing to hold on to. So you start to take it easy. by not getting attached to the middle, because you see it in context, a word that I keep using a lot. A Putujjana doesn't look at things in context. A Putujjana is stuck. Oh, okay, this is it. Yeah, yeah. And we'll look at the dot. Yes, yes, that's it. And that's what we have. 8 point some billion of us, that's what we do. Whatever they move and wiggle in front of us, we just go, yeah, yeah. Like a cat that you move a ball of twine in front of, that's what we've become. So you cannot practice the Dhamma and be dumb like the rest. You need to look at the context. You need to look at what is taking place. Vijnana paccaya. Vijnana becomes the condition for, in this case, Lord Buddha says, re-becoming. Now, once re-becoming has already taken place, Lord Buddha continues, then there is the immediate manifestation of the six sense spheres. See, Lord Buddha gave a perfect bird's eye view of what is happening. He says, Moḷiyaphagguna, don't be stuck on the consciousness and the ahara, nourishment. It's conditioning. Re-becoming, and then guess what? Re-becoming conditions what? Salayatana, the six sense spheres. Oh, and as a result of the six sense spheres now being present therein, you have the very condition for contact to take place. So Lord Buddha just explained the paticca samuppada in, in the States, there's these books, not just in the States, I mean, you can get it through online bookstores. The English for Dummies, Spanish for Dummies, Philosophy for Dummies section. Now there's those book collections. So Lord Buddha just gave that version of the Paticca Samuppada for dummies to Moḷiyaphagguna. And look at this bhikkhu coming up with the next question as being, when the Venerable Moḷiyaphagguna asked, but Bhante, who is it that makes contact? The man is in a questioning mood, apparently. He didn't get any of the things that Lord Buddha just said, because now he just switched. Oh, okay, so who is it that's getting nourishment? Okay, he didn't get the answer he wanted. He was dying for Lord Buddha to say, yes, Molia, there is an Atman inside you, there's an Atta inside you that is getting this contact, that is making contact. He's hoping for that, it seems. But he asks, who is it that makes contact? So he's still looking for somebody. And Lord Buddha is saying there is nobody as such, because you're looking the wrong way. You're looking for the wrong thing. Because as I was mentioning in the beginning, our linguistics, our interpretations, our worldview, narratives, what we tell ourselves, assume about life, dictate what we understand about life, and especially in this case, whether we understand or completely miss the Dhamma. That's why it's so dangerous for somebody who reads a little bit or does some retreats and goes ahead and claims to have understood the Dhamma. And we have a lot of that today. In fact, that's the majority of what you find online these days. Students were asking me to address this issue the other day. I did, in case of in reference to fake Dhamma teachers. I touched upon that subject, and this is just very pertinent to sutta, because our worldviews dictate whether we do get the Dhamma or not. This is dangerous because this is a lifetime that we're risking, our own life, the person. You better make sure that the Dhamma you're studying is the true Dhamma, that your understanding of the true Dhamma is the correct understanding. So don't just quickly pick something up and say, yeah, this will do, and that's it, while you squeeze that so-called Dhamma into your own linguistics or worldview, narratives, how you accept and want the world to be. Here we have Moḷiyaphagguna, a monk, living at the time of Lord Buddha, but he's still functioning with his old worldview. How many of us are Moḷiyaphagguna? That's a valid question. Are we? That only one person can answer that, and that's you. So what comes before, what comes after? And don't get stuck in the middle. That's what Lord Buddha keeps on saying. So, and Lord Buddha says, in response to that question, that's not a proper question to be asked, replied the Blessed One, as he added, I do not teach you by saying there is someone who makes contact. But if I had been instructing you by saying there is someone who makes contact, then your question would have been valid, where you would be appropriately inquiring by asking the question, Bhante, who is it that makes contact? So, seeing that I do not declare nor ever taught you in this manner, your question is wrongly formulated. Remember, in the Madhupindika Sutta, the Honeyball Discourse, we see the bhikkhus go and ask questions about Lord Buddha's teaching to Venerable Mahakaccana, who was known as the best when it came to expositing, to unraveling the teachings that Lord Buddha had given in brief. So they go to him, and after much hesitation, because he said, like, you should have gone to the heartwood. I'm nobody. You were at the source. You're coming to me to ask. You should have asked Lord Buddha when he gave you that teaching. But later on, he says, when he explains beautifully the principle of paticca samuppada, he also says, Tinnan sangati passo, by the meeting of the three, you have contact. The object, let's say the eye, I'm sorry, the sense organ or internal base, the external base, which is for the eye, there's the visual object, color, thing, matter, form. And then when you have these two, then you have eye consciousness, right? Chakku viññāna. And as these three come together, the meeting of the three is passa. Tinnang sangati passo, Venerable Mahakaccana says. But here we have Moḷiyaphagguna still looking for a person who sees. There is no such a person. There is this mechanism that's happening. This is so hard for the human brain to understand, I think. Imagine if every child is given the paticca samuppada at kindergarten, when we are taught how to see, how to feel, what is the feeling. So we are taught wrong things from the very beginning. So when the child's brain is developing and you're feeding the child wrong information, it's like trying to study a foreign language, but you're given wrong grammar, which you are being taught as correct. Now, once the child grows up, having used that grammatical set of rules, when they go to that country or speak to someone who is a native speaker of that foreign language, they're going to run into some problems because they really have to deprogram themselves. And that's what we're doing. We are deprogramming the putujjana within us. Every moment that you practice sati, you're doing that because you're opening the door for wisdom, panya, to take place. This is why it's so important to do our own work instead of just counting on, yeah, I sat for 1 hour today, or I sat for 30 minutes, and yeah, that's enough. No, you have to have you have to be doing the work by thinking about this. Lord Buddha says that's one of the ways that a person can become awakened. Even when you go ahead and really, really chew on that principle, like, replay it in your head, recollect it again and again and again. What does Bhante mean by the three links? Am I stuck in the middle by looking at this? Am I looking at the before, meaning what conditioned this to happen? And if I'm doing that, am I successfully looking at this as being a condition for that one to come right after? Already you are coming out of the matrix. You're seeing beyond what you have been programmed to see, to feel, and to interpret. But if I had, so seeing that I do not declare nor ever taught you in this manner, your question is wrongly formulated. However, if you were to ask me instead, Bhante, what is it that conditions and brings about contact? What is it that upon which contact itself rests as its sustenance? Then such a valid question indeed would be an appropriate one, for it would then deserve its appropriate answer, which is, the six sense spheres are the nourishment that serve as the very condition that sustains contact. Meanwhile, contact in turn is the responsible agent, the very condition that brings about feeling. So think about the contact being simply the spark that happens, the flames that start, and that's the feeling. Now, when we say six sense spheres, what that encapsulates are basically the two things, the internal base and the external base. I mentioned earlier the eye and the visible form. It could be the ear and an audible sound. It could be the nose and a smell, an odor, the body and a tactile, tangible object that you can touch, a flavor and a taste, the flavor or taste and the tongue, or the mind and a mind object. Okay, so you cannot have a mind object without a mind. But once you have these two, poof, what happens? The meaning of the three is contact. Tinnan sangati passo. Passa means contact. In one of the suttas, Lord Buddha says, I think I've covered it with you also. Putto bhikkave vedeti. Through contact, one feels. Putto sanjanati. Through contact, one perceives. Putto ceteti. Through contact, one intends. So you see, there's nothing solid. That's another way of understanding me, myself, and mine, and So this is, definitely one of those suttas that you can't just like listen to or read once, because it's so loaded with treasures that can turn into wisdom for each and every one of us. So remember, though, another way to dismantle this solidity that we have attributed to life is to look at each of these. Let's pick out the six senses, talk about the six senses as suffering. When you call something that you're enjoying suffering, suddenly something happens to it. That means you've created a boundary. That means you've created a wall. Now, how thick that wall is depends on how much you come to understand that it is in fact suffering, or it leads to suffering. A month ago or more, I've shared a sutta with you where we talked about the ocean, what really constitutes the ocean. Lord Buddha says, the eye ocean, he says, you must cross. The suffering that it causes, that's the ocean. The ear ocean must be crossed, because it's an ocean, it's vast. The six senses are vast, or the six consciousnesses are vast. Vast with what? If we don't understand them for what they are, in fact, suffering. Because what we do, if we don't see them as suffering, what we're doing essentially is we're latching on to them. In what form? Especially in the context of feeling, which we're going to see next. In the context of us, in relation to us having a preference for one type of feeling over another. Which feeling is that? Pleasurable feeling. And this is what you have all around you. Everybody wants to go and experience pleasure, pleasant feeling. And we're holding our arms, our hands, and feet against a dam that's all crooked, it's cracked, it's coming apart. Because we want to stop the bad feelings from coming through, the painful ones. We only want to have the pleasurable. This is where it's really suffering. But if you're too busy between the two extremes, meaning you're jumping away, you're trying to avoid, run away from the painful feeling, that means you're always going to be engaged in the pursuit of pleasurable feelings. And that's what we have. And that's another definition of a putujjana. The person is always going to run after the pleasurable feelings, expecting happiness to come out of that. That's why a person like that does not believe that you can sit there in meditation and really taste happiness. Happiness. So I mentioned the six sense spheres are the nourishment that serve as the very condition that sustain contact. Meanwhile, contact in turn is the responsible agent, the very condition that brings about feeling. Then the Venerable Moḻiyaphagguna asked, what do you think he's going to ask? But Bhante, who is it that feels? He's so incorrigible. He's hopeless. He's still hoping for something to be there. Lord Buddha's patience is unmatched. He says, that's not a proper question to be asked, replied the Blessed One, as he added, sometimes you would wish that Lord Buddha was, with no disrespect, of course, but like in the Zen tradition, in the Chan tradition, in China, in Japan, you see sometimes Chan teachers, Zen teachers, getting a piece of something or throwing the person out of the window. And there's one incident where he threw the student out and he jumped over him and on his chest and he beat the chest of this person, held his robe, and he says, do you get it now? Do you get it now? And the student said, yes, 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 Sifu, I get it, I get it, I get it. Just leave me alone. Sometimes you need that shocking value, shock for the student to wake up, because he's still stuck in delusion. He's still asking the same thing. But Bhante, who is it that feels? And Lord Buddha says, that's not a proper question to be asked. I do not teach you by saying there is somebody who feels. But if I had been instructing you by saying there is someone who feels, then your question would have been valid, where you would be appropriately inquiring by asking the question, Bhante, who is it that feels? So seeing that I do not declare nor ever taught you in this manner, your question is wrongly formulated. However, if you were to ask me instead, Bhante, what is it that conditions and brings about feeling? What is it upon which feeling itself rests as its sustenance? Then such a valid question indeed would be an appropriate one, for it would then deserve its appropriate answer, which is, contact is the nourishment that serves as the very condition which sustains feeling. So remember the linkage I was saying? Looking at the thing. Okay, let's pick now, Lord Buddha is referring to feeling. Okay, feeling. What comes before? You can even look at it in terms of arithmetic or algebra. A, B, C, right? Look at B. If you look at B, ask the question, where did B come from? Well, there's A. Can we do at least that? So if he's looking at feeling, then Lord Buddha is saying, okay, feeling arises while being conditioned by something. That is its nourishment. And here we see also contact as ahara, specifically, as one of the four aharas. So contact is the nourishment that serves as the very condition which sustains feeling. Meanwhile, this is the after the feeling, what comes after. So he's not talking about the C coming in. Meanwhile, feeling in turn is the responsible agent, the very condition that brings about craving. So if you have feeling, if you're stuck on the feeling, basically, if you're looking at the feeling and saying, I love this feeling, or I hate, despise, abhor this feeling, what comes out of that is tanha, craving. So in essence, things are happening conditionally. Things are happening conditionally. And that's another name for paticca samuppada, the principle of conditionality. But when the mind constantly resists looking at these things, these important aspects of reality as they're taking place, what essentially is doing, I'm describing the unawakened mind, the Putujjana's mind, which is the majority. When we're not looking at the conditionality, what we're trying to say is, the drive is, we do not like to be experiencing dukkha. In fact, we hate it so much that we want to not even acknowledge its existence in our lives. We don't want to acknowledge its presence. Because if you don't have wisdom, you're suffering. The only way that you can cover that up is through ignorance. More ignorance, more ignorance, more ignorance. We run away from dukkha, hoping that we're going to have appeasement, we will have contentment. Wisdom can only come when we, at least for the beginning, very, very first step, that's what I mean by at least, we need to sit down and acknowledge the fact that there is dukkha. And what essentially you would be doing by taking that moment to acknowledge that is you're creating a very tight compartment in your brain, in your consciousness, in your awareness for panya. Through the help of sati, you're creating this crack in the wall of this ignorance that we have by saying, let me look at dukkha. That's why it's so difficult. It's almost like when we talk about neurology or neural networks in the brain, how the axons and how the dendrites are connected. They don't touch, but they're very close to each other. There's chemical interaction. That's how information is carried. Electrical signals, the signals are carried without them actually physically touching, but there is connection. So if we have, just like I was mentioning about the children being given the wrong information from the start, had they been given correct information, the neural pathways would have been correctly formulated. But what we have is a situation where there is wrong connections. The neural networks are not set up right because there's a lot of information that is wrong. Every time we have a moment of sati, you are dismantling the wrong connections. And the wrong connection is another definition for having ignorance. Moha, the third, the biggest defilement, the kilesa. Moha is the absence of sati. Okay? Not just any sati, but yoniso manasikara type of sati, which is wise, radical attention, where you're looking at the main point. Yoni means the matrix, the original point. What is happening now? What is grabbing your attention? Can you pierce it like a laser? Pierce through the ignorance and see the thing as it's supposed to be seen, the way it really is. Because right view, we talk about right view, sammaditi. What is sammaditi? Sammaditi means very, very simple way of looking at sammaditthi is to look at dukkha for what it is without camouflaging it, without putting on rose-colored glasses or pretending that it's not there or that you've overcome it. You can only have sammaditthi when you have absolute presence of sati. Sammaditthi, therefore, is not something intellectual or conceptual or theoretical. Has nothing to do with that. Sammaditthi means you're absolutely 100% in the bright room called yoniso manasikara. In the spotlight. You are the spotlight. So dukkha has nowhere for it to escape from you, from your vision, that is. You're seeing dukkha for what it is. And that is the beginning of what we call panya. That's why sati is the very first. So sati is what will allow us to see these linkages, the conditionality. And then the Venerable Moḷiyaphagguna asked, but Bhante, who is it that does the craving? Again, he's in a questioning mood. That's not a proper question to be asked, replied the Blessed One, as he added, I do not teach you by saying there is someone who does the craving. But if I had been instructing you by saying there is someone who does the craving, then your question would have been valid, where you would be appropriately inquiring by asking the question, Bhante, who is it that does the craving? So seeing that I do not declare nor ever taught you in this manner, your question is wrongly formulated. However, if you were to ask me instead, Bhante, what is it that conditions and brings about craving? What is it upon which craving itself rests as its sustenance? Then such a valid question indeed would be an appropriate one, for it would then deserve its appropriate answer, which is, feeling is the nourishment that serves as the very condition which sustains craving. That's the A. Craving is the B in this case, right? Meanwhile, craving in turn is the responsible agent, the very condition that brings about, grabbing and holding on, which is upadana. So, if we can take just that from today's discourse that we are going through, this Moḷiyaphagguna Sutta, if you can just take this formula of analysis in your mind, meaning whatever it is that you're looking at, whether it's a feeling, whether it's the craving, whether it's the contact, whether it's the consciousness, what have you, whatever it is, please look at that and say, what could have been the condition, what could have been the nourishment that brought this thing about? What fed, what conditioned this thing to come to be? This thing that I'm taking for granted, this thing that I'm taking as reality, undeniable fact, the feeling, the contact, whatever. What is it that brought it on? And don't stop there, please. Look at the other link that comes after. What is it that this thing, the feeling, the contact, the consciousness, what have you, what is it that this thing that I'm looking at is a condition for? What will come out of this, basically, as a result of having this? What's the product of this? What's the outcome of this? Because it's not gonna stay like this. It's always changing. So if you could do that a few times during the day, at least 3 times a day, already you're reintroducing paticca samuppada into your life in a very practical way. This is when it comes out of the, ink on paper or letters on a screen or an audio file and into your life, where paticca samuppada, the principle of conditionality, becomes alive for you, which means you already are applying wisdom, panya. And where there is panya, there is the path to nibbana. Okay? Nibbana will never come about without panya, ever, ever. Panya is the thing. It's not the product. Nibbana is not the product of jhanas. The jhanas help, but they themselves will never lead. Panya is required, and no jhana will give you that. So then the Venerable Moḷiyaphagguna asked, but Bhante, who is it that grabs and does the holding on? Who is it that does the upadana? That's not a proper question to be asked, replied the Blessed One as he added, I do not teach you by saying there is someone who grabs or does the holding on. But if I had been instructing you by saying there is someone who grabs and does the holding on, then your question would have been valid, where you would be appropriately inquiring by asking the question, Bhante, who is it that grabs or does the holding on? So seeing that I do not declare nor ever taught you in this manner, your question is wrongly formulated. However, if you were to ask me instead, Bhante, what is it that conditions and brings about grabbing and holding on? What is it upon which grabbing itself rests as its sustenance? Then such a valid question indeed would be an appropriate one, for it would then deserve its appropriate answer, which is, craving is the nourishment that serves as the very condition which sustains grabbing and holding on. Craving. Because of craving, you have upadana. Because of tanha, you have upadana. Meanwhile, grabbing or holding on, in turn, upadana, is the responsible agent, the very condition that brings about the desire for re-becoming. So now we see the linkage between vijnana leading to bhava. That's where upadana leads us to, because you will never have tanha just and then full stop after that. No. If there is tanha or craving, it will inevitably lead to upadana, which is grabbing, because you have a favorite, you have a preference there. You like this feeling, that's the tanha. And because we grab, that grabbing itself leads us to re-becoming. You want to reach over and have another of those mango ice creams because you liked it, you grabbed onto it. Furthermore, the desire for re-becoming, so now Lord Buddha is really showing the bigger picture just to get Moḷiyaphagguna, fully answered and, completes the teaching. Furthermore, the desire for re-becoming is the nourishment that serves as the very condition which sustains birth. So now he's showing how re-becoming bhava leads to birth. And then we're going to see, and with birth serving as the condition and nourishment, there manifests aging and getting old, falling sick, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish. It is in this manner that the cycle of this whole mass of suffering continues on endlessly. So if you have birth, all of that will follow. Earlier we were talking before we sat today about the realities of painful realities of, let's say, Alzheimer's or dementia, which often leads to Alzheimer's, where the person's forgetting, they even forget how to brush their teeth, that they have to brush their teeth, or they have to go to the bathroom. And we observe this, or the person forgets where they are. What is that? So we need to really look at dukkha as dukkha, instead of sugarcoating anything. Old age or aging and decay are not words that we read. They are realities, which requires us to have sati to look at these realities. So the Dhamma has everything to do with realities that we live through. So please take the Dhamma outside of the books, outside of these recordings, and bring them into your life. Otherwise, you would be running away from dukkha, and good luck learning anything about the Dhamma with that method. Only your life will teach you the Dhamma. These are just helpful hints at best. It is in this manner that the cycle of this whole mass of suffering continues on endlessly. However, Phagguna, if and when the six sense spheres are stopped, so now Lord Buddha is reversing. So if now he's saying, okay, how can we stop this whole mass of suffering? Lord Buddha's method of teaching is so beautiful because he never leaves you halfway. He never gives you something that is mediocre or left unexplained in a sense, even though in the suttas people say that, no. But for a smart, intelligent, wise person, he said enough. So however, Phagguna, if and when the six sense spheres are stopped in their tracks, without any opportunity for them to linger on or have an influence any further, then as a result, contact itself comes to a full stop and ceases. I wanted to add these because the way I translate, I don't just use the Pali word for word translations, okay, or be extremely frugal with the words that I use. Life doesn't work with that frugality. It's a luxury no one has because somehow these teachings have survived for 26 centuries thanks to the many, many, many bhikkhus who carried them orally, through repetitions for centuries first, and then through writing. So somehow they've survived. But much of it, if we just do it word for word, it's not going to say much. In fact, there's more room for misunderstanding. So when we talk about salayatana, or the six sense spheres, we can't just say ending of them because it doesn't say anything for the modern human being living in the 21st century. We need to understand what these six sense spheres are, like I've been explaining. The eyes. What does that mean to cease? To have the eye cease? But when I try to translate here as without any opportunity for them to linger on or have an influence any further on us, that means you're still leaking. You're still leaking, lingering on. You're still got one eye on that sense organ. See, you're still paying attention to that. Meaning you're oblivious to the contact taking place. But once you stop it at that, you observe, you put the spotlight of yoniso manasikara on that sense organ, contact already stopped. You are not lost in contact anymore. That's how it ceases. And when contact ceases, then feeling itself comes to a full stop and ceases. Then, with feeling having ceased, craving naturally comes to a full stop and ceases. Once craving has ceased, then grabbing or holding on does not take place. Hence, that too ceases. And when grabbing has ceased, the desire to re-become is no more. So it also ceases. And with re-becoming fully stopped, then rebirth is cut off and no more, for it too would have now ceased. And with rebirth having come to a full stop and ceased, then aging and getting old, falling sick, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish, all these come to a full stop and cease as well. In this way, the cycle of this whole mass of suffering comes to a full stop and ceases once and for all. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. An amazing sutta, but we have to be able to give ourselves the courage, the audacity, the curiosity, and adventuresome attitude to want to go probing and to try to understand. These should not be like you read a novel. These should not be like you read a story. These should be like you trying to find, you're in a jail, you're in a heavy duty, heavy guarded, like intense security type of a prison. And you have found a map. You have found a way out. And there's no release otherwise. Forget it. You have to get yourself out of there. How would you do it? How would you read that map? How would you approach it? Meticulously. Why? Your life depends on it. Your freedom depends on it. That is how I see that is necessary for us to look at the Dhamma, to study the Dhamma, to really make it part and parcel of our lives, instead of some curiosity, instead of some ritualistic thing. Because this is your life, and what you must do to release yourself from prison. Remember, Nirodha, which is often translated as cessation, is also another name for Nibbana, which is, Nirodha means also out of prison. How can you get out of prison? Well, we need to know first that we are in a prison. We are suffering. Instead of saying, painting the walls nice, purple, rainbow colored, rose colored, with nice little characters, and make it more habitable. No, Lord Buddha says, get yourself out of there. That's why he gives us countless examples of, the man whose hair and beard and clothing is on fire. He doesn't have time to linger on and engage in philosophical debates, or to procrastinate, or to delay. So that's why you can live your life, if you're a laywoman, you can live your life as such, but you can still hold on, maintain that level of urgency with that laser sharp way of looking at whatever it is that you're experiencing and seeing it in terms of the aharas, the nourishment, and say, okay, this is here, but what is this a nourishment for? This can't be just that. It's serving, it's serving the condition for something. What could it be? And then similarly, how did this come about? Something else must have conditioned it. Already you're practicing paticcasamuppada. So it doesn't have to be this extremely heavy-duty principle that many have termed it as in the Dhamma. No, because Lord Buddha says, he who understands the Dhamma understands paticcasamuppada. He who understands paticcasamuppada understands the Dhamma. If we don't understand that conditionality, there's no way we can understand the Dhamma. Understanding requires wisdom, which requires you developing understanding. How? By bringing in sati in every single thing you do. There is not a moment that doesn't deserve your sati in your daily life. Not a moment that does not deserve it. So every moment of your life deserves sati. Every aspect of our lives. So I will stop here and see if there are any questions. Okay. Well, I invite you to go ahead and revisit the sutta. It's the PDF is online, mindreleased.com. So, but for now, let us transfer some minutes. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu lokasasanam. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mamparanti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be happy. May your path to awakening be constantly supplied with enough energy. May you be abundantly generous in your giving of sati to every aspect, every minuscule aspect of your life. May your lives be richer and richer with the Dhamma, with many aha moments that the Dhamma provides. And may your virtue grow and grow and grow with your practicing of Sila, and your Samadhi deepen, and your wisdom become richer and richer in your heart. And may you be protected, and may the Triple Gems blessings be upon you all. Until next time. Sukhya Hotu.